She claimed his room, reorganized his life, and turned his quiet world upside down. And somehow it was exactly what he needed. It was one of those hot August days when the air feels thick and everything moves slower than usual. Jake wiped the sweat from his forehead as he climbed the 3 flights of stairs to his apartment. His backpack felt heavier than normal, loaded with textbooks from his shift at the campus bookstore. All he wanted was to get inside, turn on the air conditioning, and maybe catch up on some reading before his evening class. The moment he reached his door, something felt wrong. He always locked it when he left, but now it stood slightly open. A cool breeze drifted out from the gap, carrying the scent of vanilla and something else he couldn't identify. Maybe paint or art supplies. Jake pushed the door open slowly, his heart beating faster. Had someone broken in? But thieves don't usually turn on the air conditioning and leave the door unlocked. He stepped inside and immediately noticed his living room looked different. There were boxes stacked against one wall and easels leaned against his couch. Canvases covered in bright colors were propped up everywhere. "Hello?" he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Is someone here?" The sound of footsteps came from his bedroom, followed by a cheerful humming. Jake stood frozen in his own doorway, completely confused. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe the housing office had mixed up apartment numbers. Maybe someone thought this was their place. A young woman appeared in the hallway, carrying a box of art brushes. She had paint smudges on her hands and wore an old t-shirt covered in colorful splatters. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she looked completely comfortable, as if she belonged there. "Oh, hey there," she said with a bright smile. "You must be Jake. I'm Maya. Sorry about all this mess. I'm still getting settled in." Jake blinked several times, trying to process what was happening. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been some kind of mistake. This is my apartment. I've been living here for 6 months." Maya set down the box and wiped her hands on a towel that Jake definitely didn't recognize. "No mistake. The housing office told me I'd be staying here temporarily. Something about emergency placement due to flooding in the art building dorms. They said you'd been informed." "I definitely wasn't informed," Jake said, still standing in his own doorway like a stranger. "I never got any call or email or anything." "Typical housing office," Maya laughed, shaking her head. "They probably forgot to tell you, but don't worry, it's just temporary. Maybe a few weeks, possibly a month. The repairs are taking longer than expected." Jake felt like he was in some weird dream. He looked around his apartment, which now looked like an art studio had exploded inside it. Canvases were everywhere, paint tubes scattered on his coffee table, and what looked like a pottery wheel sitting in the corner where his reading chair used to be. "Where exactly are you planning to sleep?" Jake asked, hoping the answer wouldn't be what he was thinking. "Oh, that's the thing," Maya said casually. "The housing office said this was a 2-bedroom place, but clearly it's just a studio, so I figured we'd have to share the space. I hope that's okay." Jake's mind raced. Share the space? His tiny studio apartment was barely big enough for one person, let alone 2. And certainly not for 2 people plus an entire art studio worth of supplies. "I don't think this is going to work," Jake said, trying to stay calm. "This place is really small and I'm not comfortable with sharing it with someone I don't know." Maya tilted her head, studying him like he was an interesting painting. "You seem nice enough. I'm clean, I'm quiet when I work, and I can help with rent if that's what you're worried about. Plus, I make amazing coffee." "It's not about money," Jake said, though honestly, help with rent would be nice. "It's just that I value my privacy. I need space to study and think." "I totally get that," Maya nodded. "I'm the same way when I'm working on a piece. We can definitely work out some kind of schedule. You can have privacy when you need it, and I'll do my thing when you're not around." Jake looked at all the art supplies scattered around his living space. It would take hours to move everything out, assuming Maya was even willing to do that. And where would she go? The housing shortage on campus was real. He'd heard other students complaining about having to sleep in lounges and common areas. "Look," Maya said, seeming to sense his hesitation. "I know this is weird. Trust me, I'm not thrilled about sharing space either. I like having room to spread out when I'm working. But we're both adults and this is just a temporary situation. We can make it work if we both try. Jake sank onto his couch, or at least the small part of it that wasn't covered in art supplies. This day had definitely not gone according to plan. This morning he'd been a guy living peacefully alone, studying psychology and working part-time. Now he was apparently sharing his home with an artist he'd never met. "Did the housing office give you any paperwork?" Jake asked. "Something official that says you're supposed to be here?" Maya disappeared into the bedroom and came back with a crumpled piece of paper. "Here's the work order for the dorm repairs and the temporary placement authorization. Sorry, it got a bit wrinkled in my bag." Jake read through the official-looking document. It was legitimate, signed by the housing director and everything. According to the paperwork, Maya Rodriguez was authorized to stay in apartment 3B until further notice due to emergency housing needs. "Well," Jake said, handing back the paper, "I guess this is really happening. I promise I'll try not to get in your way," Maya said. "And hey, maybe this will be fun. I've never had a roommate who wasn't completely crazy." Jake wasn't sure what to say to that. Fun wasn't exactly the word he would have chosen. Challenging, maybe. Complicated, definitely. But looking at Maya's hopeful expression and thinking about all the students he knew who were struggling to find any housing at all, he felt his resistance starting to weaken. "Okay," he said finally, "but we need to set some ground rules." Maya grinned and clapped her hands together, leaving small paint smudges on her palms. "Absolutely. Ground rules are good. I'm all about communication and boundaries." As Jake looked around his transformed apartment, he wondered what he'd just gotten himself into. But Maya seemed genuine and the situation was temporary. How complicated could it really get? The first few days of living with Maya were like trying to solve a puzzle where someone kept changing the pieces. Jake had always been a creature of habit. He woke up at 7, made coffee the same way every morning, and kept his space organized and quiet. Maya seemed to operate on a completely different frequency. She stayed up until 3 in the morning working on her paintings, humming softly to herself while mixing colors. The smell of acrylic paint and turpentine filled the apartment, replacing Jake's usual scent of coffee and old textbooks. Her brushes soaked in jars of water that she placed on every available surface, and somehow paint managed to find its way onto things Jake was sure she had never touched. "Sorry about the purple smudge on your coffee mug," Maya said on the 3rd morning, not looking particularly sorry as she continued sketching in a notebook. "I was cleaning my brush and didn't realize it was your favorite cup." Jake stared at his once white mug, now decorated with what looked like a small sunset. "It's fine," he said, though he wasn't sure it actually was fine. This mug had been a gift from his grandmother. Maya looked up from her sketch and saw his expression. "Oh no, you're upset. I can probably get that off with some rubbing alcohol. Or maybe we could turn it into art. I could paint something really nice around it." "You don't need to do that," Jake said quickly. The thought of Maya intentionally painting on his grandmother's mug made him panic a little. "Really, it's okay." But Maya was already digging through her supplies, pulling out tiny brushes and small tubes of paint. "No, I feel bad. Let me fix this." Jake watched nervously as she carefully painted delicate flowers around the purple smudge, somehow managing to make it look like it had always been part of the design. Within 10 minutes, his plain white mug had become something beautiful and unique. "There," Maya said, holding it up proudly. "Now it's not just a coffee mug. It's a piece of art that also holds coffee." Jake had to admit it looked amazing, but it also wasn't his mug anymore. It was something else entirely. This seemed to be Maya's effect on everything she touched. By the end of the first week, Jake had learned several things about his temporary roommate. She talked to herself while she painted, usually having entire conversations with imaginary people. She made incredibly strong coffee that could probably wake the dead. She owned more art supplies than some entire art stores. And she had absolutely no concept of personal space. This last point became very clear on Thursday evening, when Jake returned from his psychology class to find Maya reorganizing his bookshelf. "I hope you don't mind," she said without turning around. "I was looking for somewhere to put my art books." And I noticed your books weren't organized by color. It was driving me crazy. Jake stood in the doorway, watching as she arranged his carefully alphabetized psychology textbooks into a rainbow pattern. His neat system of organization was being transformed into something that looked pretty but made no practical sense. Maya, he said carefully, those books were organized alphabetically, by author's last name. Were they? Maya stepped back to admire her work. This looks much better though, don't you think? Now when you walk in, you get this nice visual. Flow from red to purple. Jake tried to stay calm. But now I can't find anything. If I need my developmental psychology book, I have to remember what color it is instead of just looking for the author's name. Maya turned to look at him. Paint, smudges on her cheek, and genuine confusion in her eyes. Why would you organize books by something as boring as names? Color makes so much more sense. It's beautiful and functional. This was when Jake realized that he and Maya didn't just have different habits. They had completely different ways of seeing the world. What made perfect sense to him seemed illogical to her, and vice versa. The situation reached its peak the following Saturday. Jake had planned to spend the afternoon studying in his room, which was the one space Maya had mostly left alone. He had a big exam on Monday and needed complete quiet to concentrate. He settled at his desk with his notes spread out, finally feeling like he could focus. But after about an hour, he realized he needed a specific textbook that was now somewhere in Maya's rainbow filing system. He got up to search through the colorful bookshelf, growing more frustrated as he looked for the plain gray spine of his statistics book. When he finally found it wedged between a red art history book and an orange novel, he turned to head back to his room and stopped short. Maya was standing in his bedroom doorway, wearing only a towel and holding a canvas. She had paint in her hair and on her arms, and she was looking at his room with the same expression she'd had when reorganizing his books. "This light is incredible," she said, seemingly oblivious to Jake's shocked expression. "The way it comes through that window in the afternoon is perfect for painting. Do you mind if I work in here for a bit?" Jake's brain seemed to stop working entirely. He stood there holding his statistics book, trying to process the situation. Maya waited for an answer, still studying the light patterns on his wall. I was planning to study," Jake managed to say. "Oh, you can totally study while I paint," Maya said, stepping into his room and setting up her easel near the window. "I'll be super quiet. You won't even know I'm here." The towel slipped slightly as she adjusted the canvas, and Jake quickly looked away, his face burning. "Maya, you can't just... this is my bedroom, my private space." Maya paused in her setup and looked at him with that same confused expression. "Oh, are you one of those people who's weird about bodies? My family always said Americans were uptight about that stuff." "It's not about being uptight," Jake said, still not looking directly at her. "It's about boundaries and personal space." Maya seemed to consider this for a moment. Then she shrugged and adjusted the towel more securely. "Okay, I get it. Different comfort levels. But the light really is perfect in here. What if I got dressed and then came back to paint? Would that work?" Jake realized that Maya wasn't trying to make him uncomfortable or invade his space on purpose. She genuinely didn't understand why he was bothered. In her world, apparently, sharing space meant really sharing space, and bodies were just bodies. "The thing is," Jake said slowly, "I need quiet to study, and this room is kind of my sanctuary, the one place that's just mine." Maya's expression softened. "Oh, I didn't realize. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking about it from your perspective." She started to pack up her easel, but Jake felt bad. She looked disappointed, and he could see that the light really was beautiful in his room. "Maybe we can work out a schedule," he heard himself saying. "You could use the room when I'm not studying." Maya's face lit up. "Really? That would be amazing. I promise I'll respect your space and your study time." As she left to get dressed, Jake sat on his bed and wondered what was happening to his carefully controlled life. A week ago, his biggest concern had been passing his statistics exam. Now he was negotiating room-sharing agreements with an artist who saw the world in colors instead of categories. But as he watched the afternoon light stream through his window, creating the exact patterns that had excited Maya, he had to admit she had a point. It really was beautiful light. That Saturday evening, Jake and Maya sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, a notebook between them and 2 cups of Maya's impossibly strong coffee cooling in front of them. Jake had suggested they write down some ground rules, thinking it would help them avoid future awkward situations. "Okay," Jake said, pen hovering over the blank page. "Let's start with the basics. Quiet hours." Maya wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, which Jake noticed was decorated with tiny hand-painted cats. "What do you mean by quiet hours?" "You know, times when we keep noise to a minimum so the other person can sleep or study," Jake explained. "But I do my best work late at night," Maya said. "That's when I feel most creative, and I'm not really that loud when I paint." Jake thought about the previous night when Maya's quiet painting session had included moving furniture, dropping brushes, and having what sounded like an entire phone conversation with someone about color theory. "Maybe we could compromise," Jake suggested. "Like after midnight we try to be extra quiet?" Maya nodded slowly. "I can work with that. But what about when you're studying? Sometimes you read out loud and you pace around the room. That's pretty distracting when I'm trying to concentrate on a painting." Jake hadn't realized he did that. "I read out loud?" "Yeah, and you tap your pen against things. Click, click, click," Maya demonstrated, tapping her finger against the table. "It's like a little rhythm." Jake felt his face heat up. He had no idea he had these habits. Living alone meant never having to think about how his behavior affected someone else. "Okay, so we both need to be more aware of our noise levels," Jake wrote down. "What about the bathroom schedule?" "Oh, that's easy," Maya said. "I usually shower at weird times anyway, like 3 in the morning or right after I finish a painting, whenever the mood strikes." Jake blinked. "You shower at 3 in the morning?" "Sometimes. Is that a problem?" Jake imagined trying to sleep, while water ran through the thin walls. "Maybe we could try to stick to more normal hours, like no showers after 11 or before 7? Maya looked like he'd just asked her to paint with only gray colors. "But that's when I feel most inspired, to get clean. After I finish a piece, I'm covered in paint and I want to wash it off immediately." They stared at each other across the table, and Jake realized how different their lives really were. He planned his showers the same time every day. Maya showered when she felt like it. He studied on a schedule. She painted when inspiration struck. "Maybe," Maya said slowly, "we need to think about this differently. Instead of trying to make each other fit into boxes, we figure out how to work around each other's natural rhythms." Jake considered this. It made sense, but it also scared him a little. His whole life was built around routines and predictability. "What would that look like?" he asked. Maya leaned forward, getting animated. "Well, you like quiet for studying, right? And you usually study in the evenings after dinner. What if that's when I go for walks or visit friends? Then when you're asleep, I can paint without worrying about noise. And when would you sleep?" "I don't need as much sleep as most people," Maya said. "I can function on like 5 hours, so I could sleep in the mornings when you're at class or work." Jake wrote this down, surprised by how reasonable it sounded. "What about kitchen use?" "I don't cook much," Maya admitted. "I mostly eat sandwiches and fruit and whatever doesn't require actual cooking skills." "I like to cook," Jake said. "It helps me relax. What if I cooked for both of us sometimes? If you're okay with whatever I make." Maya's eyes lit up. "You'd do that? That would be amazing. I live on peanut butter and bananas most of the time." They spent the next hour working out details. Maya would get the bedroom window light for painting from noon to 4 on weekdays. Jake could have complete quiet for studying from 7 to 10 every evening. They would split cleaning duties, though Maya admitted she had a very different definition of clean than most people. "I should probably warn you," Maya said as they finished writing their list. "I'm not great with traditional roommate stuff. I've never lived with someone who wasn't family." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. Maya was quiet for a moment, tracing the rim of her coffee mug with her finger. My family is different. We lived in this big house with my parents, my aunt, my grandmother, and usually at least 2 or 3 family friends who were staying with us temporarily. Privacy wasn't really a thing. If someone needed space, they just said so and everyone respected it. But otherwise, we all shared everything. Jake tried to imagine growing up in a house like that. His own family was small and quiet. He'd had his own room since he was 7, and his parents knocked before entering. "That sounds chaotic," Jake said, then immediately regretted it when he saw Maya's expression. "It wasn't chaotic," Maya said quietly. "It was just fluid. People came and went, but there was always room for everyone. Always someone to talk to if you needed it. Always someone to give you space if that's what you needed instead." Jake felt like he'd accidentally insulted something important to her. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it in a bad way. It sounds nice, actually. Just very different from how I grew up." Maya smiled, but it seemed a little sad. "That's why this is hard for me. I'm used to reading people's energy and knowing what they need without having to ask, but you're harder to read than my family." "I'm not good at expressing what I need," Jake admitted. "I usually just try to avoid situations that make me uncomfortable." "But that doesn't work when you're sharing space with someone," Maya pointed out. Jake realized she was right. He'd spent the past week feeling frustrated and overwhelmed, but he hadn't actually told Maya what was bothering him. He'd just hoped she would somehow figure it out. "So maybe," Jake said slowly, "we both need to practice being more direct about what we need." "Yeah," Maya agreed. "Like, instead of me just assuming you're okay with something, I should ask first. And instead of me getting annoyed and not saying anything, I should speak up when something bothers me." They looked at their list of rules, which had grown to cover 2 full pages. It was more complicated than Jake had expected, but it also felt more hopeful. "There's one more thing," Maya said, looking a little embarrassed. "About earlier today when I was in your room in just a towel. I genuinely didn't realize that would make you uncomfortable. In my family, we're pretty casual about that stuff." Jake felt his face turn red again. "It's not that I'm a prude or anything, it's just that we barely know each other, and I wasn't expecting it." "I get it now," Maya said. "Different families, different comfort levels. I'll be more mindful about that stuff." "Thanks," Jake said. "And Maya, the light in that room really is perfect for painting. I don't mind sharing it, as long as we stick to the schedule." Maya grinned. "You know, Jake, I think this might actually work out." As they cleaned up their coffee cups and put away the notebook, Jake felt something he hadn't expected. Optimism. Maybe having a roommate wouldn't be the disaster he'd imagined. Maybe it would just be different. The next morning, Jake woke up to the smell of coffee and something that might have been pancakes. He found Maya in the kitchen, wearing an apron covered in paint stains and flipping what looked like the most lopsided pancakes he'd ever seen. "I thought I'd try cooking breakfast," Maya said cheerfully. "Fair warning, I'm not very good at it." Jake looked at the pancakes, which were somehow both burnt and undercooked at the same time. "They look interesting." "They taste better than they look," Maya said hopefully. "Probably." Jake tried a bite and immediately reached for his coffee. Maya watched his expression and burst out laughing. "Okay, they're terrible," she admitted. "But I tried, right?" "Points for effort," Jake said, still trying to swallow the bite. "Maybe we should stick to you making coffee and me handling the cooking." "Deal," Maya said, already reaching for the cereal boxes. As they sat eating cornflakes instead of pancakes, Jake realized that this was what compromise looked like. Not perfect, but workable. And maybe, he thought as Maya told him a funny story about her disastrous cooking attempts in her family's kitchen, it might even be kind of nice. Things were actually going well for about 2 weeks. Jake and Maya had found their rhythm. She painted in his room during the afternoon when the light was perfect, and he studied at the kitchen table until she finished. She made coffee strong, enough to wake the entire building, and he cooked simple meals they could share. They even started watching old movies together in the evenings, though they had very different taste in films. Maya loved weird foreign movies with subtitles and strange plots that made no sense. Jake preferred documentaries about psychology or crime shows, where everything was explained logically by the end. They compromised by alternating choices, which led to some interesting discussions about why people liked different types of stories. "You analyze everything to death," Maya said one evening after Jake spent 20 minutes explaining why the detective in their movie had made poor investigative choices. "Sometimes you just have to feel the story instead of thinking about it." "But if the logic doesn't work, how can you enjoy it?" Jake asked, genuinely confused. "The same way you enjoy a dream," Maya replied. "Dreams don't make logical sense, but they can still be beautiful or scary or meaningful." Jake was starting to understand that Maya experienced the world differently than he did. She trusted her feelings and instincts in ways that seemed impossible to him. He needed facts and explanations for everything. But somehow their different approaches were starting to complement each other, instead of just causing confusion. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, everything changed. Jake was at his desk in the bedroom, working on a research paper about behavioral psychology, when he heard loud voices from the living room. Maya was supposed to be painting, but instead it sounded like she was arguing with someone. "You can't just show up here whenever you feel like it," Maya was saying, her voice tense in a way Jake had never heard before. "Come on, Maya, don't be like this," a male voice replied. "I know you missed me, you always do." Jake tried to focus on his paper, but the conversation was getting louder and more heated. He could hear Maya moving around, probably trying to clean up her art supplies. "I told you we were done, Danny," Maya said. "I meant it this time." "You say that every time we fight," Danny replied. "But you never actually mean it. We both know you need me." Jake felt uncomfortable listening to what was obviously a private conversation, but the apartment was too small to avoid hearing everything. He put on his headphones and tried to concentrate on his research, but even with music playing, he could hear the tension in the other room. After about 10 minutes, he heard the front door slam. Jake took off his headphones and listened. The apartment was completely quiet, too quiet. He found Maya sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by her art supplies but not actually doing anything with them. She was just staring at a blank canvas, her hands folded in her lap. "Hey," Jake said softly, not wanting to startle her. "You okay?" Maya looked up at him, and Jake was surprised to see that she looked smaller somehow. The confident, energetic person he'd gotten used to seemed to have deflated. "That was my ex-boyfriend," Maya said quietly. "Danny. He has this way of showing up when I'm finally feeling good about things." Jake sat down on the couch, not sure what to say. He wasn't good at dealing with other people's relationship drama. "Do you want to talk about it?" Maya was quiet for a long moment. "We dated for almost 2 years. He's an artist too, but he's one of those people who thinks suffering makes art better. Like if you're not completely miserable, you're not creating anything meaningful." Jake tried to imagine what that would be like. "That sounds exhausting." "It was," Maya said. "But he's also really talented, and when things were good between us, they were amazing. He made me feel like I was part of something important. And when things were bad," Maya picked up a paintbrush and started twirling it between her fingers. "When things were bad, he made me feel like I was crazy, like my feelings didn't matter, or I was being too sensitive, or I wasn't committed enough to my art." Jake felt a flash of anger towards someone he'd never met. "That's not okay." "I know that now," Maya said. "But when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to see clearly. He has this way of making everything seem like it's your fault." Jake thought about what he'd learned in his psychology classes about manipulative relationships. That's called gaslighting. It's when someone makes you question your own reality. Maya looked at him with surprise. "Yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. Like I couldn't trust my own thoughts." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Jake wanted to say something helpful, but he wasn't sure what that would be. Maya seemed to be thinking hard about something. "The weird thing is," Maya said finally, "living here with you has made me realize how different things can be. Like we have disagreements, but you never make me feel stupid for having different opinions." "Why would I do that?" Jake asked. Your opinions are just as valid as mine. See, that's what I mean, Maya said, a small smile appearing on her face. Danny would have said something like, your opinions would be valid if you actually thought them through instead of just feeling them. Jake felt another flash of anger. That's a terrible thing to say to someone. Yeah, it really is, Maya agreed. I'm starting to see that now. The next few days were tense in a different way than before. Maya seemed jumpy and distracted. She kept checking her phone and looking toward the door like she expected someone to show up. Her painting sessions became shorter and more frustrated. I can't concentrate, she told Jake on Thursday evening. I keep thinking he's going to come back. Has he done that before? Jake asked. Yeah, he doesn't like it when I try to move on without him. He says I belong with him, that other people don't understand me like he does. Jake thought about this. Do you think that's true? Maya considered the question seriously. I used to think so, but honestly, you understand me better than he ever did, and we've only known each other for a month. This surprised Jake. Really? Yeah. You listen when I talk. You don't try to fix me or change how I think. You just try to understand where I'm coming from. Jake realized that Maya was right. Somewhere along the way, without really meaning to, they had started to understand each other. Not completely and not without effort, but genuinely. Maya, Jake said carefully. If he shows up again and you don't want him here, I'll ask him to leave. Maya looked at him with an expression Jake couldn't quite read. You would do that? Of course. This is your home too. You should feel safe. Here. I've never had anyone offer to do that before, Maya said quietly. Jake felt sad that this was apparently a new experience for her. That's what friends do for each other. Friends, Maya repeated, like she was testing out the word. I like that. That weekend, Maya seemed more like herself again. She spent Saturday afternoon painting in Jake's room, humming softly while she worked. Jake studied at the kitchen table, occasionally glancing over to watch her paint. He was starting to appreciate the way she moved when she was focused on her art, like she was dancing with the canvas. Jake, Maya said suddenly, not turning around from her easel. Thank you. For what? For being normal, for being kind, for showing me what it's like to live with someone who doesn't make everything. Complicated, Jake looked at her, silhouetted against the afternoon light streaming through the window, and realized something had shifted between them. They weren't just roommates trying to coexist anymore. They had become something more important. They had become people who cared about each other's well-being. You don't have to thank me for that, Jake said. But you're welcome. Maya turned around and smiled at him, and Jake noticed that she looked more relaxed than she had in days. You know what? I think I'm finally ready to change my phone number. Jake smiled back. I think that's a really good idea. As Maya turned back to her painting, Jake realized that helping her feel safe had made him feel different too. Stronger somehow, like he was capable of standing up for things that mattered even when it felt uncomfortable. He'd never thought of himself as someone who got involved in other people's problems, but Maya wasn't just other people anymore. She was family, in a way he was still figuring out how to define. By November, Jake and Maya had created something neither of them had expected when this whole arrangement started. Their tiny apartment had become a place where psychology textbooks lived next to paint tubes, where the smell of coffee mixed with turpentine, and where two very different people had somehow learned to make space for each other. Jake had stopped organizing his books alphabetically. Maya's color-coded system had grown on him, and he had to admit it did look prettier. Plus, he'd discovered that searching for books by color made him notice titles he might have otherwise overlooked. Maya had started keeping regular sleep hours at least most of the time, after realizing that Jake's steady routines actually helped her feel more grounded. Their friends had finally stopped asking weird questions about their living situation. At first, everyone had been convinced something romantic was happening. Jake's study group kept making jokes about his artist girlfriend, and Maya's friends from the art building couldn't understand why she was living with some psychology guy instead of another artist. People are so weird about male and female friendships, Maya said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. Like they can't imagine that we just genuinely like each other as people. I know, Jake agreed, scrubbing paint off a plate that had somehow become Maya's palette during lunch. My mom keeps asking when she's going to meet my special friend. Maya laughed. Your mom sounds sweet. My family would just assume you were my boyfriend and start planning the wedding. They had established their own strange little traditions over the months. Sunday morning pancakes, which Maya had finally learned to make without burning. Wednesday movie nights, where they took turns picking films and Jake had learned to appreciate stories that didn't make logical sense. Friday afternoon, cleaning sessions where Maya turned decluttering into an art project and somehow made even scrubbing the bathroom feel creative. Jake had also started posing for Maya's figure drawing practice, which had been awkward at first but had become surprisingly comfortable. She approached drawing the human form the same way she approached everything else, with complete focus and no embarrassment. It had helped Jake become more comfortable with his own body and less worried about things like perfect appearance. You have really interesting bone structure, Maya told him one afternoon as she sketched his profile. Great cheekbones, very geometric. Thanks, Jake said, not sure if that was a compliment or just an artistic observation. It's definitely a compliment. I don't waste time drawing boring faces. The semester was winding down, and both of them were buried in final projects. Jake was working on a research paper about social adaptation in shared living spaces, which had turned into a partly autobiographical study of his own experience with Maya. Maya was preparing for her final art show, a series of paintings she called light studies that featured the afternoon sun in their bedroom at different times of day. I never realized how much the light changes throughout the day until I started really paying attention, Maya told him as she worked on her latest canvas. Like, right now it's this soft golden color, but in an hour it'll be more orange, and by sunset it'll be almost red. Jake looked up from his laptop where he was writing about the psychological benefits of cross-cultural living arrangements. The light really was beautiful at this time of day. I never noticed that either until you pointed it out. See, we're both learning new ways to see things. That was true. Jake had learned to notice colors and textures and the way light moved across surfaces. Maya had learned to appreciate schedules and routines and the peace that came from having predictable patterns in daily life. Their biggest test came in early December when the housing office finally called. The art building dorms had been repaired, and Maya could move back whenever she was ready. They both stared at the phone after Maya hung up. So, Jake said carefully. That's good news. Yeah, Maya agreed, but she didn't sound particularly happy about it. They spent the rest of that evening not talking about it. Maya painted with unusual intensity, and Jake tried to focus on studying but found himself reading the same paragraph over and over. The next morning, Maya brought up the subject over coffee. I've been thinking about the housing thing, she said, stirring her coffee more than necessary. Yeah? The thing is, I like living here. I know that's weird because this place is tiny and we're constantly in each other's way, but I like it. Jake felt relief wash over him. I like it too. I was worried you'd want to leave right away. Really? You're not tired of sharing your space with a messy artist? Jake looked around their apartment, which was currently decorated with Maya's latest paintings propped against every wall and his psychology books scattered on every surface. It was chaotic in a way his old life never had been, but it was also more alive. Honestly, I don't think I want to go back to living alone. This place feels empty when you're not here. Maya grinned. So we're doing this? We're choosing to be roommates instead of just being stuck with each other? I guess we are. They called the housing office that afternoon to officially decline the dorm space. Jake added Maya to the lease, which required him to have an awkward conversation with his landlord about the unauthorized roommate situation. Fortunately, Maya's cheerful personality and offer to paint a mural in the building's lobby won him over. You two are either going to be best friends for life or drive each other completely crazy, the landlord said as they signed the paperwork. Why not both? Maya replied, making him laugh. That evening, they celebrated their official roommate status by cooking dinner together. Jake handled the technical parts while Maya added creative touches that turned simple pasta into something that looked like it belonged in a fancy restaurant. "You know what's funny?" Maya said as they sat down to eat. "When I first moved in, here I thought you were going to be this uptight guy who would spend the whole time trying to change me. And I thought you were going to be this chaotic person who would completely disrupt my life," Jake admitted. "Well, you weren't wrong about the disrupting part," Maya said with a laugh. "But it was good disruption." Jake thought about that. His life had definitely been disrupted. His carefully controlled routines had been thrown out the window. His quiet, predictable space had become colorful and unpredictable. But Maya was right. It had been good disruption. "I think I needed some chaos in my life," Jake said. "I was getting too stuck in my own head." "And I needed some stability," Maya replied. "I was getting too scattered." As winter settled in and the days grew shorter, their apartment became a warm refuge from the cold campus. Maya's paintings covered the walls, creating splashes of color that brightened even the grayest days. Jake's books provided endless conversation topics, and Maya had started reading some of his psychology texts out of curiosity. "This stuff about cognitive biases is fascinating," Maya said one snowy evening, curled up on the couch with one of Jake's textbooks. "Like how we see patterns that aren't really there." "You should take a psychology class next semester," Jake suggested. "You'd probably have interesting insights about how the mind processes visual information." "Maybe I will. And you should take an art class. You have a good eye for composition." They were planning their spring schedules when Jake realized something that surprised him. Somewhere along the way, without really meaning to, they had become the kind of friends who influenced each other's decisions, not in a controlling way, but in a supportive way that made both of them want to try new things. "Maya," Jake said one night as they were getting ready for bed, "I'm glad you answered that housing office mix-up. Even though I completely invaded your space and reorganized your entire life, especially because of that," Jake said. "I didn't realize how small my world had gotten until you showed me what it could look like with more color in it." Maya smiled. "And I didn't realize how much I needed someone who thought things through before acting. We make a good team." As Jake settled into his bed, which was no longer just his bed but his bed in their shared room, he thought about how much had changed since that August afternoon when he'd found a stranger in his apartment. He'd gained a roommate, a friend, and a completely different perspective on what home could look like. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the campus in white. But inside their small apartment, surrounded by Maya's colorful paintings and the warm glow of their reading lamps, everything felt exactly as it should be. "Jake?" Maya called softly from her air mattress on the floor. "Thanks for letting me stay. Thanks for making me realize I wanted you to." And with that, they settled into the comfortable quiet of two people who had learned that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places.